Okay, so in this video, I'm going to walk you through my replacement of my front right wheel bearing. So instead of taking off the wheel hub assemblies and going and getting the bearing pressed out of it, which is kind of a pain in the butt, I opted for just buying the entire assembly. Now, these weren't available the last time I looked, but I looked again and I found these and decided to go with this option, and it worked out really well. So I just wanted to point out the ones I used, the 950004, and I have the Tacoma Prerunner, the 2007, and I have the 2.7 liter.
Alright, so I got the wheel off here, and I've got the jack stands. The stands are supporting all the weight, not the jack itself. You don't want this supporting the weight of your car. Make sure your jacks are supporting the weight of your car. And this is what we're going to be working on. So I actually turned the wheel out a little bit to give us easier access to some of the bolts behind the caliper. So if you look at my car, I turned my steering wheel all the way to the left. It's going to allow us to hit these bolts easier with our breaker bar. The next step is going to be to disconnect this breaker line right here. So you can see it's just mounted right here. We want to get this taken off so that we can move this caliper out of the way so we can do the work we need to in here. All right, so to untighten this here, get in view. So untighten this, I used a 12mm socket, and then we're just going to take this bolt out and this will become loose. All right, we got the brake line loose here now, and now we want to go ahead and loosen the caliper bolts. So this is your caliper, and here are your brake pads. So brake line comes in, applies pressure to these. These squeeze your rotor right here, which causes you to stop. So we got to take this off so that we can take our rotor off to get to our wheel hub assembly. So if you look back here, there's two bolts. There's one right here. Let me show you where I'm pointing from the front. So right there, and then down at the bottom, there's going to be another one. See if I can get my hand around here. So right here. So for this is why we turned our steering wheel way to the left. It's going to allow us, I slide back here, to get this breaker bar in here and not hit the side of our truck, so that we can loosen these things up because they tend to be on pretty tight. Alright, so I got these loosened up now. So the one here, and then the one right here. And that took a 17mm socket. And I'm going to go ahead and loosen them the rest of the way with an extension and just a regular socket wrench. So I got my socket extension here. I'm going to loosen these the rest of the way so I don't hit this brake line right here. Kind of want to stay away from that. Alright, so we got one more bolt to take off down here for the caliper. Still taking the caliper off. This bolt down here. And you want to make sure when you take this off, you don't let it hang by the brake line here. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and tied just a rope up here. If you have a bungee cord, that'd probably work a little better. I didn't have one, so I'm just going to use a rope. And then I'm going to go ahead and, where we remove this bolt, I'm going to tie that rope into there once I get this off, so that we don't let this caliper hang by the brake line right here, because you don't want to kink this or damage it. All right, here you can see our caliper that was on our rotor. This is where I removed the two bolts, 1, 2, and then I just tied a rope to this. Just secured it up here just so that it's not hanging by the brake line. So now we got to remove the rotor. So on these rotors, let me get the light. You can see you got little holes here, and those holes are to help you pop this thing off, pop the rotor off the hub assembly, because they tend to rust to the hub assembly. So you can wiggle it. Sometimes you can get it off. Seen some guys use a hammer here, but since we got these holes, that's what I'm going to use to pop this thing off. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and thread this bolt in here. It's a little tight, and then I'm going to use my ratchet, just tighten it up just until this pops off. Alright, so I got it popped off the top here. It's still stuck on the bottom, so I don't want to warp the rotor too much and keep forcing it in this hole. So I just saw it move just a little bit up here, so it leads me to believe it's loose up here. But let's go ahead and hit the bottom one too, so that they're being moved out in parallel, so we don't bend the rotor in a weird way. Alright, so you can see I continued to screw in up here, and this whole rotor has become loose now. So I'll just take this whole rotor off, set it aside. Try to be careful not to get the rotor too dirty here. If you get a lot of grease and stuff on it, this is what your brakes are trying to squeeze against. So you want it to have a clean surface here. So just watch that as you're messing with your rotor. Alright, now that we got the rotor off, here's our wheel hub assembly. And it's actually bolted in 4 spots. So we got 2 up here, 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4th is on the other side. So basically just a square of bolts. I've got an 18mm wrench. Alright, so I got these all loosened up. Now I'm just gonna loosen them all kind of at the same time until this thing is, all the threads are completely loose on it, and then we'll pull off the hub assembly here. Alright, now that I got these bolts loose, you can kind of work the whole hub assembly loose. And this is stuck just a little bit, so I'm going to take a hammer and gently just knock around the outside of this hub assembly, just gently, so that I can get this thing to wiggle free. You should be able to wiggle it free with your hands, but if you can't, you can use something like that. If you still can't get it free, you want to go to AutoZone and get a slide hammer. Go ahead and rent one, and you look up YouTube videos on slide hammers and how to get a hub assembly off. Alright, so I finally got this off. If there's any type of rust along this line right here, you want to go ahead and try and clean some of that off with a real fine grit sandpaper or something along those lines. Make sure that, you know, all the junk that all the rust and crap that you wiggled free in here, just clean it out with a clean cloth. And so on your hub assembly here, the ones that come from Dorman are missing this cap. So what I'm going to do is basically put a screwdriver in backwards here and just pop out this cap so that I can use it in my other Dorman. Alright, I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but this is the way I got the first one off, and I'm going to do it with the second one. Backwards screwdriver right down the middle of it. You can see it sits off the ground a little bit, and we're trying to pop that cap right out. So go ahead and start pounding away a little bit, try and pop the cap out. First one popped out pretty easy. Alright, so I got the cap off. It's a little bent, but when you put it back in on the other one, we're going to go ahead and punch it the other way, which is going to even it back out again. Alright, so I got the new wheel hub assembly here. We got our cap. I'm going to leave this in the box because it's kind of padded down here. I don't want to damage the new hub assembly. Do the opposite of what we just did. Take a screwdriver. Just go ahead and pop that down into the new hub assembly here. Right, so I got that in here. Looking pretty good. I go ahead and clean it off, and then we'll start reassembling, start putting things back together. So look, if you look at your old wheel hub assemblies here, get this in some light so that hopefully it's visible. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it looks like originally there was a little red Loctite on it. I don't have red Loctite, so I'm going to go ahead and use blue Loctite. It doesn't list it in my manual, but go ahead and do your research and figure out what you want to do with this. But I'm going to put some blue Loctite on it and go ahead with that. So on the new hub, so on each one of these, it's going to bolt into our bolt hose over here. I'm going to go ahead and put some blue Loctite just a little bit on each one of these before I bolt it in to the required spec. Alright, so now that we got that all, I went ahead and cleaned this off a little bit too. Just kind of wiped it down. So this has 2 little knots in it. You can see one right here by my thumb, there and there, and they basically just sit in the holes up here, so you're sticking it on the right way. It's going to be sitting on right. So I'm going to go ahead and hold this up here, stick the new hub assemblies, and bolt them in with that blue Loctite on them. Alright, so you don't need a lot of this. I'm just going to put a touch on here. Oop, that's more than enough. Alright, so we got the plate on. We have our wheel hub assembly back on. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure when you're screwing these in, you kind of hop back and forth. So I'm going to go diagonally. I'm going to screw this one in a little bit. Go down here to the bottom right, screw that in a little bit. Screw this in a little bit. Go over here and screw this a little bit. Just so that it's moving the wheel hub assembly in kind of, not at a weird angle if you screw it all the way in on one side. Got the new hub assembly on. Got all the bolts tightened down. Got to clean off the rotors a little bit. So over here I have my rotor. I'm just going to clean out in here. Make sure I didn't get any grease or anything on the actual rotors. And we'll go ahead and pop these back on. Alright, so we put the rotors back on, put the caliper back on, lined up the bolts back here, got those in. We made sure this brake line up here, there's a little, it connects, like a little connect right there that slips into that hole, just so that it lines up with the threads here. So as you're putting this on, make sure you get this locked in as well, otherwise you might be taking it apart to put that back on. Alright, so torquing the caliper back on. So we got our caliper mounting bolts here. I have the fixed type because I have a Prerunner. So it's telling me in the Haynes manual I want to torque this down to 91 foot-pounds. So I'll show you, get the torque wrench out, get it set to 91 and show you. Alright, so I got the torque wrench set at 91, if you can see that right there. And I'm going to go ahead and torque these caliper bolts to 91 until I hear this thing crank a little bit. Alright, last one. So I'm going to torque our this bolt. It's on our brake line. Torque it back to 21 pounds per foot. And put the wheels back on and we should be done.